What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Strung Out. As always, big shout out to Paulie. And I did want to mention, I was looking for, I think you mentioned there was an email. I couldn't find it. I do get a lot of emails, so if you could re-forward the email, that would be greatly appreciated. In any case, we are continuing with the 2025 reissue of Strung Out's 2004 album Exile and Oblivion. Again, big shout out to Paulie for sending this vinyl. And the next track in the playlist is Blueprint of the Fall. I like the phrase. It sounds catastrophic. It sounds like disaster. But it also sounds like something which would be predictable. Something which would conform to a plan. Essentially a blueprint to destroy society. Or to destroy some organization or entity. So yes, it sounds like a blueprint you wouldn't intentionally follow, though I guess the motivations and purpose of some people would be more to destroy than to build. So yeah, I'll see what it's about, what I can catch on the first listen, and again, I do think there is a lyric sheet in this, is that right? Yes, there is a lyric sheet, so we will see what I was able to catch and then check out the actual lyric listing. Is this side 1 or side 2? Is that... okay. Okay, so this is side 1. So as I said, this is Strung Out from their 2004 album Exile and Oblivion, and the track is Blueprint for the Fall. Is it for the fall? Am I saying that right? Of the Fall. Blueprint of the Fall. gotta be one of the best strung out tunes I've heard. Like, just an ace punk rock song. Holy crap. And I will say, it sounds closer to the Strung Out I knew through Twisted by Design than did most of the tracks on the Element of Sonic Defiance, which I very much enjoyed. But again, that album had a like heavier, like almost, hard rock or like even like more metal sound. But this sounds, again, I mean, even Twisted by Design, there's aspects of like hardcore punk rock with a bit of a metal flavor. But again, this sounds closer to the Strung Out I knew going into this deep dive than did the previous album. In any case, yeah, like, I love this one. It's got energy, it's very frenetic, it's still melodic, not just in the guitar work, but even the vocals. There was that, like, sliding melodic vocal, which I enjoyed. It was, like, in harmony. And yeah, ultimately I enjoy the sequencing of the track. Most of it, very fast tempo, a couple sections where it slows down and gets a bit heavier, and then goes back into the high tempo again. Lyrically, I feel like, I mean, again, this is 2004. We heard reference to shock and awe, which is maybe a term that, or a phrase that's been used in different contexts, but famously, it was used by U.S. officials like Rumsfeld and like Dick Cheney, Karl Rove, I think, like people who were part of the Bush W administration, and it was in reference to like the warfare they were going to wage against Saddam Hussein and the Iraq regime at the time, and the idea that we're just gonna, destroy everything, and they're not even gonna know what to do. And flash forward 22 years, does it feel like there's been a lot of change? Maybe in some ways it feels like the very same concepts, but even worse is the way I would see it. But the point is, again, there's a lot of punk rock bands and other bands who at the time were saying like, look, we're marching toward a very scary future with what, the Bush administration and other like, governments which may have been nominally democratic, but which were trying to limit the ability of the people to have an influence on, what the military or government of their country was doing. And again, the degree to which that's true now feels all the more terrifying, and yet again, it was very much a concept that a lot of bands that I listened to were addressing in the mid-2000s. So yeah, there was a line about shock and awe, there was a line about the Potomac, which, the Potomac River, it's over on the east coast of the U.S., it runs directly adjacent to Washington, D.C., and it was something about, like, the Potomac and then westward to the sea, meaning across the entire contiguous United States. And I do believe there's reference here to, like, the world or, society being destroyed, and maybe the country, and, where is our place in history. So I do think this is about, again, the way that a powerful nation state like the United States, was waging war, like breaking down, like, democratic processes and any semblance of, like, global stability for the gain of a few, and, like, the idea that that could actually usher in like wider regional wars and conflict and death on a global scale. So yeah, it feels like it is, number one, a shot at what was happening then. Number two, the idea that like some people, again, it's almost like they're following a blueprint for the cataclysmic destruction of any semblance of like peace and stability, and allowing simple people who have very little influence on the decisions, political and military, that happen in places like Washington, D.C. and along the Potomac, as well as in other countries. Again, the idea that in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, that most people had any influence on what he and his Ba'athist regime were doing, is laughable. They had very little influence on that. So yeah, it feels like it's addressing those issues, and maybe you can extrapolate more broadly to the way that, again, the idea of, powerful forces and forces that might profit in the short term, essentially following a blueprint of destruction, or a blueprint for the fall. Wow, this is going to be very hard to read from my aging eyes. Okay, so the lyrics. Imagine a place. Okay, see, if she's going to leave, then I can go grab my other phone, which has a light on it, which will allow me to read this much more easily. Okay, imagine a place where freedom's just a word on the wall, surrounded by the wreckage of towers. I did hear that line too, and again, like, that could be a more general reference, military destruction of civilian infrastructure and so on. But of course, we're only a few years after 9/11, which, whatever you think about that incident, there is on some level the idea that it was, and again, committed by people who are as genocidal, as any, but there was the idea that, well, if you get involved in foreign wars and you are bombing places, eventually people who are themselves unethical are going to strike back. And so the idea of the World Trade Towers representing on some level, the chickens coming home to roost and so on, this was, an argument that a lot of people had that well, hey, it's not great, it was murderous, and it is something that, should be addressed. And yet, the US has been doing similar bombings and destructions in other countries. So yeah, the idea of the standing in the wreckage of towers that could never fall, the idea that this will never happen here, the destruction of infrastructure and a sort of attack against ordinary people, it'll never happen here. And these towers, the exemplars of financial opulence and so on, well, they were eventually destroyed, again, by terrorists and people who deserve no sympathy. And yet, again, I think that's sort of what's being referenced here. Will never fall, where was I? The company will avenge. The company, sometimes, the CIA is referred to as the company. I don't know if that's the line that's happening here. Imagine the lies like bombs turn the shock and the awe. For justice in time and a land for justice never was. One thief to rule them all, which I like that. It's sort of a Lord of the Rings type reference. To rule them all, or to rule them all along the Potomac and west toward the sea. Is it through or though? Through the ghettos, past the monuments we all built to house the weak. It's the blueprint to the fall of our place in history. The end to what we all believe to be the hope to save this place. And I walk among the flagstones through the graves. I did hear that. An apocalypse is blooming in the sage. Dead presidents lined coffin text in biblical unrest. The blind pride home genocide and the secret wars we all missed. I did hear that. It's the blueprint to the fall of the entire human race. To the end to what we all believe would be the hope to save this place. Oof. So I don't think I was too far away. I mean, there's some lines there that I think are more broad, and there's a poetry, especially the last couple lines of the lyrics. There's a sort of rhythmic poetry to it, almost like word of or stream of consciousness. But yeah, I do think we are talking about destructive forces in the modern world, which erase the idea that eventually maybe nation states can stop blowing each other up. Maybe power-hungry, despotic leaders will stop marching tens of thousands of people off to their own deaths and killing many other innocent people in other places. So yeah, the idea that what's happening right now, this shock and awe bombing and this let's go to war here, even though the intelligence suggests that it's what you're saying is happening is not actually happening, and these other secret wars which we don't even learn about until later, and their consequences come back to haunt us. It feels like that is somewhat of what's happening here. Don't knock everything over, Luca. Anyway, I've talked long enough. Once again, big shout out to Paulie, big shout out to Strung Out. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Peace.